Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, goeienaand, and shalom, good people. Welcome to it. My name is Cyril Ramaphosa, Big Daddy Liberty. You're watching Liberty and Friends. That's right, Liberty and Friends only on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Remember, this is your week-ending news analysis show. We look at the news week that was, and we look at all the major headlines, things that made you happy, sad, or angry. Maybe you were gnashing your teeth this week, or even anxious. You know, we live in rather scary times. So on this show, we unpack that with what is always a veritable mix and a different lot of analysts' voices out in the mainstream, and of course those who operate primarily on the social media space, which is where I work, which is where you'll find me. Very interesting guest tonight. Lots of new faces. You know how it is on the show. New faces, new faces, new faces. I love that. And even a contrarian voice, which has always been a mission, if you will, an objective of Liberty and Friends, to have at least one individual who, you know, holds different views, who views the world through a different lens. So we have that tonight. So if you're just joining us, hey, Tara, welcome to it. Sanbonani, good evening. Dumelang. I see the numbers are ticking up. Speaking about the numbers, remember, guys, the only price of admission here on Liberty and Friends on the BDL show is to hit that like button. That is the only price of admission. Hit that like button and keep that engagement up over 50%. There is about 167 and rising number of you who are watching across all the platforms. Remember, this show is simulcast on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. So with that being said, let's get those likes up, people. Get them likes up. I don't want to have to ask again. People, come on, hit that like button. Don't be stingy. You know, as I always joke on the show, hit that like button, and for every like, you'll feed them kids in Africa. So hit that like button, people. Get their likes up. You owe me them likes. As I like to say, I'm the cookie monster when it comes to them likes. Give me. With that being said, let me actually introduce my guests tonight. Oh, do I not have an interesting one tonight? Woo-hoo! Y'all are, oh man, you caught me on a live wire tonight. Speaking about a live wire, a chap who hosts a good show that I watch when I do get the opportunity to log on and watch stuff, which is ironic because I'm always online, but I never get to watch other content creators. I'm talking, of course, about the host of the Manpatria show, Dumo. Denga, Dumo, good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Hi, Cyril, and thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to having a good discussion tonight.
Hey, Tada, if you can just raise your levels, my brother.
No problem.
And otherwise sounding good, we can hear you. Another face who you've seen on Liberty and Friends, in fact, if you watched the Big Daddy Liberty Show, pardon me, on Wednesday, when we had that conversation about the rather very serious situation of the Cape taxi violence, a chap who is very well versed on the issue of the taxi industry, having written that paper on the sector that charted the history and how we got to the sector as it is now. I'm talking, of course, about independent journalist and researcher Ivo Vegter. Ivo, there he is. Good evening. Welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Good evening, Cyril. Very good to be with you again.
A tada. I'm seeing the comment section also is becoming rather lovely and lively. Guys, remember, your only price of admission is to hit that like button. The numbers are growing. There's about 220 of us now, but only 53 likes. Get the likes up, guys. I need to see a minimum of 100 likes. Speaking about a chap who I like a lot, a new face here on Liberty and Friends, and really the BDL show broadly, Nicolas Woode-Smith, who of course is the founder of The Rational Standard. Nick, hey, tada, good evening.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be on again.
Brother, good to have you on the show. First time on the show. New face. Always good to have new faces here, and it's all new faces from here on out, including, of course, a chap I've been on his show before. Maybe you might be one of his viewers who's migrated over here. I'm talking, of course, about Chris Wyatt, who is the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. Chris, good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends. All the way from, is it Pennsylvania? Chris, are you with us?
Yep, can you hear me okay? I had to switch to putting my mobile on to listen to the conversation. I'm with you. I think I'm a few seconds behind because I was getting an echo.
If you're getting an echo, it might be from your side. I'll give you a moment just to troubleshoot it, and then I'll bring you. I'll bring you back again. Just give you.
It is. It's from my side.
All right. How's it sounding now? A little bit better. All right. I can hear the feedback.
No, I'm listening to my mobile. Why don't I'll just switch to my mobile. I'll log out and come back in. I'll do it that way, okay?
No problem. That is Chris Wyatt, of course, the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. We'll have the homie back on in a moment. Another new face, a chap who I think will make tonight's show rather interesting. Because as I've always said, Liberty and Friends should always at least have one individual who thinks differently, who views the world through a different lens from my own, or even perhaps a lot of the other guests. Who am I talking about? Well, this is a chap who on social media, Twitter, said, hey Big Daddy, why don't you have me on your show? Because I have ideas which are rather different to yours. I'm talking, of course, about Buddy Wells. Buddy, good evening. Welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Hi, Sinclair. Thanks so much for having me on the show, and hi to all the other guests on the show. Nice to finally chat to you in person. I've seen some of you, some of your work, your writings and stuff. So thank you very much for having me.
And I will be very interested to hear your thoughts, critiques, and of course, on this panel, you know, what we do on this show, of course, is we look at the news week that was. And, you know, we do so in a manner which allows our guests, pardon me, our viewers, to go a bit deeper than the headlines, to maybe discuss some of the more broader social, political, and economic trends that inform a particular headline that we saw in the week. So with that being said, guys, welcome to it, to the entire panel. If you're watching the show, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button, please. Hit that like button. There's 240 of us and growing, and only 69 likes. Come on now, let's not leave it at 69. Let's go the whole way. I hope you saw and heard what I did there. But guys, welcome to it. And maybe as we say that, let's hop straight into it, because it's been a rather interesting week, and it's been a week that's seen almost a lingering news issues from the previous week now begin to play themselves out this week in rather different iterations. What am I talking about? Of course, I'll begin where I think the memories and maybe the scars of a lot of South Africans are still rather fresh, and that was the rampant looting and public violence we saw in the previous week, to which we're now seeing the cost of which, the cost both financially, economically, and emotionally, play itself out in the news cycle. The chattering classes have come out to now opine much more on this issue. And a very interesting headline that I saw this week, pardon me, that kombucha came back, but an interesting headline I saw this week was, you know, from the Daily Maverick. You know, business leaders concerned that the eThekwini or Durban mayor offers platitudes but no concrete plans to rebuild operations. And I think this has been a bit of a theme throughout the week, as a lot of the business owners who were looted, who had their shop fronts destroyed, begin to reach out to insurers, perhaps, you know, whether that is Sasria, which is the state-run entity that insures businesses and private individuals when there are incidents of public violence. And of course, their own insurers, the private insurers. You'll find a large proportion of business owners were having that conversation this week with their insurance companies. But there's the one part of the conversation, Ivor, I'll come to you first, which is missing, which is, a lot of people are saying, well, it's okay. A lot of these businesses have insurance anyway. But that seems to misunderstand economics, which is it's not the money that they'll get replaced which matters, but actually for the economy, the goods and services that they rendered that have been destroyed, which will be the telling issue of how the economy is affected in the weeks to come.
Yeah, a lot of people say, well, don't worry about it, it's insured. Well, that's because it goes back to something Bastiat wrote in 1850. He said, economics is about the things that we see and the things that we don't see, the effects that we don't see. And a lot of people will tell you about the effects that we see, but it's much harder to look at the sort of secondary and tertiary impacts of the effects that we don't see. And one of those is, of course, the cost to insurance companies. What that does is, of course, it costs the insurance companies, which is a bad thing for them. But that costs the entire economy, ultimately. Insurance rates are going to go up. They have to recover this money somehow. So this is not damage. The damage doesn't disappear. The damage, the destruction of value that happened during the looting is destruction that you can simply never get back. It's lost. And whoever ultimately foots the bill, that value just doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, the 20 billion lost to the economy, whether it's Macra that foots the bill, or SPAR that foots the bill, or Sasria or an insurance company, that doesn't really matter. It's 20 billion that's no longer there.
And that's the scary thing here. We're talking astronomically high numbers, Dumo. I'm going to come to you. And sometimes it becomes very hard to grapple them. And you can be a bit desensitized when they're just thrown at us. And I'm going to throw a few of those numbers out that were cited in this article. And this article has other insights which I need to unpack with you guys on the panel, because Durban and KwaZulu-Natal in particular is in a lot of trouble. Speaking about someone who had a bit of trouble earlier on, I see Chris Wyatt is back. Chris, a quick sound check with you. Are you back with us?
Can you hear me now? Are you hearing me okay?
Perfectly well. All right, thanks, Chris. Welcome to it. I was just, Dumo, I was coming to you. A lot of numbers began to come out in terms of unpacking the sheer seriousness of this matter. Now, the eThekwini municipality, that's the Durban City Municipality Administration itself, basically came out this week to say, look, eThekwini's budget is already under pressure due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or in real terms, lockdown, because that's what's actually affected people, not the pandemic, but the lockdown, and well-documented acts of the obvious fraud and corruption in that particular administration. Now, according to the own Metro, that's the municipality's estimates, it lost 50 million rand, that's 50 million rand in revenue in just this week of unrest, with quote, the increased unemployment, we anticipate that cash collection rates will be affected, close quote. That's the administration itself coming to the party with commentary on this particular issue. Talk to me about that particular element, because it seems to be a forgotten part of this whole conundrum, that the looting, the violence, the anarchy that we saw happened already in the context of a depressed, I use the word depressed in the English sense, not the economic sense, but a depressed economy. And, before that, a South African economy that wasn't growing in any significant way anyway.
Right. Sihle, you're right about the economy was not growing even before the pandemic, and now the looting has just made things worse. I think just looking at those figures, it paints a very bleak picture of what to expect. Tough times are coming to KwaZulu-Natal. The looting has left a lot of businesses in a bad state, which means that some businesses will have to close down. They may get the insurance payouts and they may hold on to it and say, well, you know what, should we really take this money and put it back into the business, can we just not take our money and just leave? Because it could get worse. So there's also incentives that are playing a role here, because when people see something of this nature happening right before them, they will have the tendency to actually wanting to leave and not actually come back. So I think we also need to take that into consideration, going back to what Ivo Vegter said with regards to the unseen. The unseen are the incentives, the choices that are made in the background. And now with the eThekwini government coming out and giving those figures, they are essentially saying, listen, there's not much we can do as the government. And this shows me that, look, perhaps we should just rather at least, see which responsibilities can actually go to more localized situations, as opposed to just trying to let the government do everything. Because now we're seeing it, right, that the government can't do everything. And we need to talk about that a bit more.
Nick, speaking about talking about this a little bit more, let me come to you. And again, I want to bombard you with a few more numbers, because there's two significant things that came out here. Basically, this particular story that I'm citing from is after, in this past week, the eThekwini municipality and its mayor, one Mayor Kaunda, I can't think of his first name right now, met with business leaders in Durban. And this meeting was well subscribed. Over 140, as the article calls it, captains of industry rocked up in order to voice their grievances with the mayor. Of course, there's two distinct grievances. One related to the failure of government during the looting, insofar as a municipality or a metro like this has a metro police force that is meant to enforce law and order. And there was a significant and profound failure of that in Durban. And we discussed that in last week's Liberty and Friends, where even community members had to resort to taking charge of their own safety of life, liberty, and property in their communities. But the Durban community also expressing that same frustration, say, in the first instance, you failed us as a municipality who we pay taxes and rates to, in terms of your inability to provide the security. A lot of our businesses in the retail space have been completely physically destroyed. Warehousing, storage, the fuel supply, which was sabotaged to a large extent, with trucks having tires slashed and facilities burnt, and of course warehouses up in smoke. These business leaders saying, you failed us in that first instance of what the state is meant to do, which is to provide security and law and order. Now you're failing us from a status lens, of course, in providing financial support, which was what some of them wanted, or at the very least, some sort of financial reprieve by way of maybe less rates during this period to allow us to recover. And what a lot of them were saying is, if I can go back to these notes and cite some of these numbers, the numbers are already quite dire. By its own estimates, this is the municipality, property and equipment losses were in the range of the 15 billion rand, the B, have occurred. And at least 1 billion rand, in stock across the various businesses so far surveyed had been lost, while 40,000 formal businesses, that's 40,000 formal businesses, and more than 50,000 informal traders. This is the part of the conversation that didn't make it in the mainstream media. The informal traders in particular have been affected. The total impact to the eThekwini GDP, that's the city's GDP, has been estimated to be more than 20 billion rand, and more than 150,000 jobs are at risk, and close to 1.5 million homes are facing the prospect of having no income due to the unrest. I must come to you, Nick, because again, the business leaders were quite right to express that this is a failure of government, actually, that has brought us to this dire state.
I think a big problem with all these large numbers, to paraphrase everyone's favorite mass murderer, Stalin, one death is a tragedy, a million is just a statistic. And I think that a lot of people just can't understand, even fathom these numbers, and just seems surreal knowing just how many people's lives have been destroyed. Because it's not just 15 billion rand lost, it is 15 billion rand which is spread across millions of hundreds of thousands of businesses, just unfathomable numbers of families which are going to be starving, unable to feed their children, unable to buy medicine, unable to do things that they need to survive and to thrive. And it's completely right, there's a complete failure of government, but not just in this event. It's been a failure of government since the word go. It's been the regulations and the corruption and the BE procurement and the cadre deployments and all this other unfriendly environment the government's created that's made life a living hell for business owners and for entrepreneurs for decades. And then when this happens, well, actually before this, then we had the lockdown, which was just pushing it even further. It took all the regulations and pushed them into the top gear. And then we have this, where the government's only real job, its fundamental thing, regardless of which ideology you believe, its only real job and its fundamental job is to protect the citizens from thugs and from invaders. And it failed at that. Just simply did nothing. We saw cases where SAPs were hiding behind civilian militias. It's pathetic. And, well, it's pathetic for the cops. I thought it was kind of cool, but I haven't really trusted the police for well over a decade now, maybe a little bit when I was a child, but I think we all should have grown out of that by now. And then now after the riots, there simply is not enough capital, there's not enough will, there's not enough competence for the government to actually reach a solution. I cannot, they weren't able to do it when it was easier, before the riots. If they couldn't do it then, are they really going to be able to help businesses and the people now? I really doubt it.
And again, this is the question, Buddy, let me come to you, that a lot of citizens are asking themselves in the aftermath here. And guys, a quick reminder, if you're just watching, we've just hit that 21 minute or so mark on the show. You're watching Liberty and Friends. Buddy, I was about to get into, getting your sense of things here. Here are business owners from across the city in this particular meeting with the mayor. And the mayor, as they say, is just passing platitudes here, placating them. And according to the business leaders, there's nothing really concrete coming from the state. After this failure that we just spoke about now, there was nothing concrete coming from the state around how do you assist us as the business sector in protecting going forward our property rights, protecting our ability to trade freely in the eThekwini municipality, because Nicolas is quite right. It isn't just the issue of the past week's looting that we have just come from. Business owners in that part of the world are facing another threat, Buddy. There's now the rising threat of these criminal gangs who've existed before, by the way, in Durban in particular. They sort of self-identify as quote-unquote business forums, and basically what they belong to that one faction of the ANC that self describes as the radical economic transformation lot, the RET lot. But in Durban, they self-styled themselves as business forums, and what they do is they basically extort businesses, so-called white businesses, for business. Now, what we're seeing develop in the aftermath of the looting and the public violence are these business forum gangs going to, let's say, malls or shop fronts and saying, end your current relationship with the cleaning company or the refuse removal company that you may have, and hire us, pay us 1 million rand and hire us, or else. And the or else is quite serious, because they're rocking up to these malls, for example, with quite armed to the teeth. How do you juxtapose that? If you're a business owner and you're in a meeting, with the mayor of your city, and you've just accused them of failing to protect you then, and you're facing this right now, where to from here for these business owners? Is South Africa a business-friendly environment?
So the lens that I would look at all of this through is the economic lens, which is my kind of stance on understanding the economy is informed by the modern monetary theory, which basically describes how states are funded. Mm-hmm. And I think that really gets to the core of what we're talking about, because I think a big problem that we're facing is that most of our economists don't understand how states are funded. So there's a misperception that taxpayer money is spent by the state, and that the state is dependent on taxpayer money in order to spend, and that creates a lot of capacity constraints on the state, which are basically false constraints, because the state is in most modern economies, the state is the issuer of the currency that the economy spends in. So if the private sector is short on money, it's because the state isn't actually spending enough money into the private sector. And so if you view it like that, in terms of state spending is creating the money in the private sector, taxation is destroying money, then you start to realize that the constraints that we've put on our police force, for example, are false constraints. The state could be spending more money into the private sector, employing people to protect businesses, to keep people safe, to take on these like lawless elements, and in doing so, what the result of that would be a higher private savings, which will be spent onwards on private businesses, driving up their profits, driving up their sales, and driving up incomes. And the only constraint that the state has in terms of the amount of money that it can spend on the things that the private sector needs, like policing, for example, is that it has to keep inflation low. And if you look at South Africa, we see a lot of idle resources, idle people. We could be putting a lot of money into utilizing these idle resources and people that would create more supply of goods and services, more supplies of energy, which will bring the prices down, or at least keep them from going up too fast. And
let me jump in here quickly, just to probe you a bit. And funny enough, the question just came up from Kamaria, which is, where does this money come from? Because, for instance, the eThekwini municipality itself, that is the provincial, the city administration came out and said, hey guys, as things stand, we have a shortfall of 50 million rand, in our coffers, and this is a practical limitation to our ability to render certain services. Now, I'm not going to argue that excuses their inability to render a safety and security function. And Chris, I will come to you after this. I'm not going to allow them to use that as an excuse, but the state itself recognizes that it receives its funding. It is a consumer of money, the money that it gets from the more productive in our society, namely you and I, those who work and produce and are then who have our income taken from us by way of taxes.
That's correct in terms of local government and municipalities who can't issue currency. When they spend, they're not issuing new currency. They're spending money that they're collecting from the private sector. So municipalities they have to collect taxes in order to spend. But they also get transfers from national government. And when national government transfers money to them, the money that the national government is transferring to them is like all national government spending, is created through an overdraft on Treasury's exchequer account at the South African Reserve Bank. And when South African Reserve Bank creates an overdraft, that's a daily overdraft that is cleared at the end of every day. The overdraft facility basically is money. It's money creation. What that is that the South African Reserve Bank it credits bank reserves. So it credits. Say for instance, if the South African Reserve Bank, if the Treasury is going to pay you to do something, say they pay you R1 million to do something for them. Now, what will happen is that that National Treasury will instruct the South African Reserve Bank to credit your bank's account at the South African Reserve Bank with reserves, with R1 million worth of reserves, and then your bank will credit your bank account with a bank deposit of R1 million. And those are basically the creation of bank reserves and the creation of bank deposits. And that is money creation. And when you pay tax, what happens is that the money gets paid into bank accounts, the tax and loan accounts at the banks. And at the end of each day, that the overdraft that has been run by Treasury on its exchequer account is reduced to zero by removing money from the tax and loan accounts at the commercial banks that we pay our taxes in, and when we buy bonds, the money goes to there as well. And so that money is removed from those accounts, and that's reducing bank reserves and bank deposits. And so,
Buddy, I'm gonna come
so
in
that's money destruction. So the point is that you can't destroy money that hasn't already been created. You can't. So when taxes are paid, it's being paid with the money that's already been spent into the economy by the government, by government spending. It's government spending created the money. The taxes and the income from loans is destroyed. So and the municipalities are dependent to some extent, actually very, very dependent on transfers from national government. And those transfers are from money creation. And what's happening at the moment is that government is taxing too much of the rands that it creates out of the economy, because we've been convinced that it makes sense to think of government spending as being funded by taxes, but it's not. It's funded by money creation. And there's no real reason.
Buddy, I'm gonna have to come in here because I need to get Chris
to tax the money out unless there's inflation.
Buddy, don't worry. You'll get a chance to get into this, because there are some fundamental disagreements here. And the first one that I think you are not reconciling is value. None of what you're describing speaks to the idea that the currency that people then trade would have a value. And if people feel like a currency that they're trading has no value, whether it's in the hands of the state or in the hands of the private sector, people will not have any confidence in spending it, because its value would be rather meaningless if it's just created out of thin air. And again, I'm not saying you said out of thin air, but it's effectively what you're arguing for here. But hey, hang on, hold that thought. Okay. Let me get to Chris, because we haven't heard from him at all. Chris, I'm going to open you the question, and you're welcome to respond, and I'll get responses from everybody here too, because this is an interesting conversation to have by and large, because I suppose it's a school of thought. To someone who may have looked at, for example, and I'm not saying this is Chris's view, but I'll argue that there is a person who has this particular view who would have heard Chris and said, well, that makes sense, you know? If the issue is here that there is a lack of money for those businesses that need the money, or a municipality that needs the money in order to rebuild, for example, or in order to pay for the security that's now needed to fight these RET thugs that I spoke of earlier on, who are trying to extort these businesses for R1 million to do the cleaning and blah, blah, blah. Buddy would have us believe that, well, you know, you can just print that money in order to pay for all of these things that are needed for not only the rebuilding, but also the security. Where's he wrong? Or maybe I'm wrong in my understanding?
Can you hear me out?
Yeah.
All right. Well, one of the hazards going last is there's a lot to unpack, plus people steal your thunder. So a couple of points of my thunder were stolen. I'll try to get through this very quickly. I do talk fast, so that'll make it easier. First off, this is a very interesting conversation about the money. Money has no value, no intrinsic value whatsoever. It's only the confidence that people place in it. We need to look no further than Weimar Germany in the 1920s to know this. We need to look no further than Zimbabwe in the 2000s, the odd decade. And once again now, the currency is unraveling once again because it's backed by nothing. No confidence, no trust in the macroeconomic policies of the government. So that's, there was a time when economists talked about the money supply in the terms of M1, M2, and M3 different types of money. One is physical, actual currency and coinage that's out there. Another is what's sitting in banks and zeros and ones, that sort of thing. It seems to be lost in the world today, but money has no value unless it's backed by something. And governments, if it wasn't for the bastardization of my currency in the U.S. by corrupt political administrations, Bush and Obama, in quantitative easing and destroying the value of our dollar by printing more and more and more and more. The only reason the dollar didn't collapse is because there's only two reserve currencies left in the world. There was a time 30 years ago when the pound, the Deutschmark, the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, even for such a small country, the dollar, were all reserve currencies. The only reserve currencies today, real ones, even though the IMF says the Chinese currency is, it's not, is the dollar and euro. The euro would have collapsed because of Greece, Ireland, Spain, and Portugal a decade ago, were it not for the fact that my country bastardized our dollar with quantitative easing. Now, very quickly, let me just switch so I get this, so I get in. Regarding what happened in KZN and in Gauteng, okay, I differ a little bit with Ivo in that I think some of this is easily calculable. So productivity loss is something that has to be looked at, has to be part of the calculation of what loss has gone on in South Africa. Foreign direct investment that's going to disappear, the stock, those things are relatively quantifiable you can look at. But the loss of confidence, the trust in the environment for doing business, conducting business, that's hard to calculate. The lost business opportunity. Every day now, things aren't being sold that should have been sold. That's a negative, and that's gone. It's difficult to get the true value of that. Public finances are less the issue here. It's private sector. And Tile, you actually stole a little bit of thunder. You mentioned the informal sector. I've been mentioning that since this started. Informal traders are completely ignored. In some economies in Africa, that's 3/4 of the economy is informal sector. Not in South Africa, it's about 35, 40%. But that's not coming back anytime soon. And the other piece, this is a new piece, hasn't been mentioned yet, is what about the rest of Southern Africa? No one's talking about Southern Africa. This greatly harms Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, even the Congo and Angola are affected, and Namibia by this nonsense.
That's right.
And then Duma said something which I don't think was his view. He's just throwing it out as food for thought. When he said that thinking the government could do everything. Well, who thought the government could do anything, let alone everything, is my question. I don't trust the government to do a damn thing. 680,000 private security guards in the private sector shows that the South African government can't provide security for its citizens. And big names are going to survive. I'm almost done. See that? Big names are going to survive. So Macro will be around, Africa Bank will be around, Game will be around. These guys will survive. But it's the small and medium-sized enterprises nobody's talking about that are completely wiped out. And almost all of them are black-owned businesses. They don't give a crap about black South Africans. They don't give a crap, the ANC. So, those small, medium-sized enterprises are gone. People invested in a barbershop or a beauty salon, a nail salon, or a small, a tuck shop or a spaza. It's gone. And there's no bank going to give them a loan. They have no collateral. They can't get anything back. They put 10, 15, 20 years of life into it. It's all wiped out. And nobody cares. Nobody cares. The ANC sure doesn't care. Unless you're a cadre, they don't care about you. And I'll end it there.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come back to Ivo. And guys, don't worry. You'll all get, this is a 90-minute show. We get an opportunity to talk and you can take your time a bit, but not too much. Ivo, I must come back to you because I think that there's some valuable insights we're hearing now here. And the issue of value is an important one. Value is determined by those who use the currency, the actual people who use that currency. It can't be determined in some dark, shady room where people print money, which is where my disagreement, for example, would be. And I'm seeing a lot of that in the comment section, for example, people chastising fiat currency. Fiat currency, of course, is the current currency we're using. Dumo just put out a comment saying, perhaps, go back to the gold standard because of the disciplines it introduces in the monetary system. That's one view, of course, from Dumo. I don't want to get too lost in this debate. Buddy sort of spiked the well here a little bit, but I don't want to get too lost in this debate because we still need to look at the actual headlines that made the week. But it is important to talk about this because there may be someone who takes a Buddy-esque view and says, well, don't worry. Yes, all of these businesses were destroyed. Yes, all of this, there's this rubble and blah, blah, blah. But we can just print the money and bring everybody back to
I think you're misrepresenting me on that one.
All right, fine. I'll let you chime in, Buddy. But that's why I said that a Buddy-esque argument might derive from what you said to say printing the money is not a problem. Because we do have the politicians to say things like that, for example. Ivo?
Look, I call MMT magic money theory. There's a few points that need to be made here, and I'm going to crib from a guy called Jeff Deist here, who writes for Mises.org. He makes 3 points. MMT is not modern. Kings and nobles have for years or for centuries have debased their currencies, right, in order to fund their endeavors. And it's always at the expense of their subjects. Chris mentioned Zimbabwe, he mentioned the Weimar Republic. Hyperinflation happens, and this is purely as a result of printing money. In the US, you don't see price inflation so much yet, consumer price inflation, but you see massive asset price booms. Right, housing prices, stock markets. The stock market didn't even blink when coronavirus, when the pandemic came around. Right? It just kept right on flying. Why? Ask yourself why investors looked at this pandemic and thought, well, no, everything's all right. Nothing's going to change. We'll make money. Well, we'll make money because the government will print it for us. Right? And that goes straight into asset prices. Eventually, it'll go into consumer prices. And we're already starting to see signs of that even in the US. So, the whole idea that MMT debasement of the currency is modern isn't. It's ancient, and it always ends up in tears. It's not a monetary policy, right? It's a fiscal policy. It's the idea that state spending somehow makes everyone rich. But the state has never created value. It's people who work. People who work create value. If the state could create value and bequeath it to us by printing money and putting money into the economy, then why would we need to work? Why would anyone need to be productive? It just makes no sense. And then MMT is not a theory. Right? It's an accounting sleight of hand, really. To suggest that the value that is created in the economy by productive people is actually created by the government because the government prints the money that they work for, that they use as a currency. It's very simple. If MMT people, and there's a bunch of high-profile people that believe in this stuff. If they get their way, more and more people are going to switch away from the fiat currencies, the printed currencies, and they're going to switch to things like Bitcoin or gold or you name it. Something that is valuable, that is scarce, that is fungible, that actually has all the characteristics of a proper currency. Because a currency with unlimited supply is not a proper currency.
That's right. I mean, that is actually the bottom line here. But guys, before we continue this conversation, we're nearing the 1/4 mark, the halfway mark here on Liberty and Friends. Welcome to it. I'm in conversation, just as a reminder, with Dumo, Denga, the host of the Manpatria show, Ivo Vegter, researcher and independent journalist. Shout out to you, Ivo, and that taxi report. We'll get into that issue right now in a moment, pardon me. Nicolas, Woode-Smith, the founder and really writer at Rational Standard. Make sure you check them out. So we'll give everybody an opportunity to share their links and where they can be found at the end of the show. Buddy Wells, who is a public finance activist. Buddy, I don't know if I got that right.
Yes.
There we go, public finance activist, and of course, Chris Wyatt, the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa show. Fellas, I don't want us to get too lost on this topic. Perhaps what we can do on a later basis is have this conversation, because I can see it does rather spice up the curry real nice, as I like to say. But there are other issues I want us to get into in terms of what happened this week. Guys, when it comes to Durban, Dumo, I'll come to you, and then we'll do Nick, and then Chris. When it comes to Durban, the point I was making earlier on is that Durban is in a lot of trouble. KZN in particular is in a lot of trouble. It has these, not only does it come off the back of the looting and the destruction, the burnt factories, burnt warehouses, blah, 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 I can go down the line. But there's two other emergent issues. I got into the first one, which are these criminal gangs who call themselves business forums, really that radical economic transformation faction of the ANC and of course of the EFF and really leftist formations in this country, who believe that through force they can force themselves on to the existing white monopoly capital economy and take a portion of it in order to enrich, they'll say blacks, but really enrich themselves. Has nothing to do with race. Never be dribbled. Don't be dribbled by that. It's never to enrich quote unquote black people, it's to enrich themselves as these political elites. And as I said, we're seeing them show their ugly face again, insofar as extorting businesses who were destroyed during the looting for as much as 1 million rand at times, to demand contracts to clean up or whatever the case may be, rocking up with arms, as I'd said. Now, I raise this because it's been an ongoing problem in places like Durban, where construction sites, for example, of major infrastructure, public or private, had ground to a halt because these same individuals rock up onto a site demanding their cut, as they like to put it, and often rocking up armed to the teeth. One of the biggest automotive producers here in South Africa, Toyota, which has a factory, a massive factory in the south of Durban, actually at one point had these criminal gangsters rock up on their site and shut down the gates, with them demanding their cut of Toyota's production in Durban. So this is a massive problem, which again speaks to the failure of law enforcement, the state, to uphold the law and order in Durban. This is a massive problem, as I said. The other issue becomes, of course, as I go to my notes, pardon me, fellas, let me just go back to my notes very quickly. The other issue, of course, becomes these same companies are now actually making quite openly, boldly, pardon me, openly saying, you know what, maybe investing in Durban is just simply not worth it. And maybe even Project South Africa in itself is not worth it in terms of investing here. Because another topical issue this week, which compounds these problems, is these same businesses say we can't even get our goods out, export our goods, because the ports in this country had come under a cyber attack. Now, there is an entity in South Africa, a state-owned entity called Transnet, which owns and runs the railway networks and, of course, the ports in the country. Transnet this week came under a massive IT breach, as they called it, which effectively shut down their IT systems this week, for most of the week, in the country. So effectively, when that system went offline, the gates to our ports in this country were actually shut down. So if you live in a port city, you would have seen invariably a line, a row of trucks, sometimes kilometers long, as nothing could go in or out of our ports. Now, guys, let's add a bit of context here. This is already after, as I said, the looting incidents and really the supply chain generally in South and Southern Africa being affected. And Chris rightly pointed out that it doesn't just affect Durban, KZN, and Gauteng. The sub-Saharan Africa is impacted by this because Durban is one of the busiest ports. So this cyber attack comes off of the back of that. And I just wanted to get through this one interesting note here. Give me a second, guys. There we go. And the businesses in the area basically stating, this is in Durban and Richards Bay Port in particular, that so far they've lost 259 million rand due to, on top of that 259 rand, sorry guys, on top of the looting and violence, which they'd suffered 250 million rands in losses, this shutting down of the port simply makes things untenable, as they put it. And as things stand, the ports in this country are in a shockingly bad state. The past 5 years have seen our ports, this is a quote from one of the businessmen who operates out of the Durban port. In a World Bank report issued earlier this year, the port of Durban, which I've said is the busiest, was listed as one of the 3 worst ports in the world out of 351 ports assessed. Therefore, the cyber attack is going to result in more reputational damage for South Africa. I raised this issue, guys, because it leads on from the looting and the violence that we saw. As I said, this is now playing itself out into other aspects. And more importantly, Dumo, than I said, Chris, more importantly, you now face a situation where if you're a business person in this country, you're looking at all these things add on, and you're just thinking, hey, man, if anything is controlled by the states, it really is pretty crappy.
Right. And I agree with that. And what will be even more shocking is that there will be people or other companies, other countries from outside saying, hey, business people, we have got better conditions. We're not as crazy as your government. And also at the same time, if you invest in our country, you'll get a tax break, you'll pay lower in tax, and they'll give you all these benefits. So now when a business person is measuring this up, he's like, well, I mean, I might as well just go that side at least, and therefore I can go and make some more money. Remember, businesses are there to make money. And if they're going to do that, and if someone can offer better conditions, they'll definitely leave. And then also, I mean, what adds to this is that now, as you mentioned, you've got these RET gangs rocking up to places and saying that, well, we demand a cut of this and that. So now the business has to pay tax, Then on top of that, they have to pay criminal organizations. Then on top of that, they have to pay for inefficiencies from Transnet and all these other companies and everything like that. I mean, when they start adding this up, they'll just be like, whoa, why don't we just go to this country X? Because they got space and they're telling us to come here and they're giving us discounted prices. So we need to understand the game of incentives is a big one to play here. And I think that now if Durban Port is actually rated as one of the worst ports in the world, I think it shows really that perhaps there has to be some sort of improvement. But I don't think there is any incentive to improve things at this point in time. I do think that this government, again, as I said earlier, and I'd said it not because I believe it, but I think they've reached that point where their capacity has been stretched to the highest point, and they really cannot cater or do everything. They can't just do everything for everyone. They have to relinquish, and I think even for Transnet as well. Again, are there regulations that are preventing private players from managing ports and stuff like that? And let's see how we can liberalize that so we can increase our capacity, get more competition, and the prices drop. So yeah, that's what I'll have to say about that.
And Chris, let me come to you because, again, Dumo raises an important word here. There's an important word he used, which is competitiveness or competition, as he put it. I mentioned Durban Port being rated as one of the 3 worst performing ports out of 361, according to the World Bank. There is a port just north of us on this east coast, or on that east coast, pardon me. That's Maputo. That's in Mozambique. And hey, man, the Mozambicans haven't been playing around. They've been getting their act together insofar as making that port rather competitive. And a lot more goods are going in through there, ironically, from Mozambique, to then service that Gauteng market and, of course, Southern Africa market. South Africa's lunch can and will be stolen by other competitors, and seemingly we don't see that yet.
Well, it should be stolen, and Duma's spot on. And my advice to American businesses to, quit sleeping and get in the game in Africa for my consultancy, the Indaba Africa Group. I tell people that one of the challenges in South Africa is it's highly uncompetitive when it comes to trade, even with other African countries. So Duma's kind of on top. I mean, when you take into consideration you have to provide your own electricity, I mean, what the hell kind of nonsense is that? For a country that once produced 62% of all electricity in all of sub-Saharan Africa was consumed. That's right. And you have to provide your own electricity, you have to provide security forces, you have to repair roads so that your trucks can do things, so you can do business. It's utterly insane. And that's before you even get to protection rackets and playing criminals so that they don't burn your place down, that sort of thing. And you're spot on there, Sile, with Maputo, but there's 2 ports. Now, Maputo has done a little bit, but they're at a disadvantage being a Lusophone country. It's not one you can't overcome. But the easier one, and the one that's, of course, this is because SWAPO's staring at their navel. They've done no service delivery in 30 years, and that's why they're about to get unseated there. They lost heavily in the local elections last November. But Walvis Bay is a lost opportunity. They're just now expanding that port. That should have been done 25 years ago. It's a better alternative to get things into Angola, get things into Botswana and into Zimbabwe than going through Durban with all this stuff. Durban has that one artery. You come out of Namibia, you can go multiple directions. So I'm not saying that their ideal places are much smaller, they can't handle the cargo capacity, but the point is that South Africa becomes less, and I haven't even talked about the low productivity work of the South African workforce, which is abysmal. I'm sorry, those of you who know me, I love South Africa. It's after America, it's my first love, so I guess second love. But let's be honest here, South Africa's productivity rate is abysmal because of HIV, because of tuberculosis, because of work ethic, and among some different groups in the country and different peoples. And it's not a great place to put money in. It's only the big woke corporations or those who have billion-dollar operations that can squeeze money out of it. Let me just add a couple things really quickly before I stop. It took the FBI to finally stop protection rackets, and we still see it on small scale in cities like New York and Brooklyn, and places like that. But the mobs controlled our cities, as a consequence of relying on the mobs for intelligence to get into Italy during World War II. We became beholden to them, unbeknownst to most of the public. But the FBI had to root out these things. I have no confidence with the Scorpions gone that Chicken Hawks or that SAPs could ever root out this stuff, or they have any interest in rooting it out whatsoever. I mean, it's ridiculous. So this is all the ANC's fault. This is the culture of impunity that has gone on for far too long. When you can walk up and kill a farm manager and there's no consequences, when you can torture and mutilate and dismember farmers and their children and there's no consequences, when you can execute a catch and transit driver in broad daylight in Sandton by shooting me in the back of the head after he surrenders the money for no reason. That culture of impunity that no one's ever going to be prosecuted or made to pay for their crimes by this complicit RICO operation known as the African National Congress, or as I prefer to call them, the angry, naughty children. I mean, the state is either complicit through participation in this or through negligence. That's the bottom line here. And, you know, you mentioned Transnet, yet another example of the foolhardy idea of a state-owned enterprise. The state spending money competes with the private sector. Here in America, the Manchurian cadaver has a $6 trillion budget. That is larger than the entire GDP of over half the world, almost 3/4 of the world. $6 trillion the federal government is sucking out of our economy each and every day. It's disaster. Transnet is just a total mess. So what happened to the 208 coal car train that overturned? Do we know yet? We still haven't heard about that. Just before the internal civil war in the ANC, a la known as the insurrection, now unfolded the past few weeks. That train car, there was 2 train car derailments, and we've heard nothing about it because they're not transparent. They're not answerable to the people like a private sector firm would be that would go bankrupt if it didn't deliver services. There you go.
Absolutely. And I mean, well summed up there. Buddy, I'm going to come to you and then Nick, because there is a conversation to be had here, and I sort of raised it in the chatter offline, that, you know, there's always been an ongoing debate, Buddy, regarding, you know, do we really need state-owned enterprises to run these critical services that the private sector is saying, hey, man, relinquish it into our hands, let us at the very least run it and give it a semblance, if not actual, efficiencies, so that we can actually help grow this economy. But this is the same private sector that's fighting against an ideology from the state that seeks to do the opposite. You know, more centralization, more state control, more a political booty system where SOEs are run by the friends of politicians and not the most competent people. You know, it's clearly beginning to bite, Buddy, or are we wrong here?
No, I think that's, I mean, I'm all for private sector competing with the state, and I think that the state should also be able to compete with the private sector. I just don't see how on these monopolistic kind of endeavors, like, for instance, railway lines, power cables, not power stations, but, you know, power networks, and, you know, things that make no sense to duplicate, because, you know, you're running there's a road going up to Joburg, for instance, or a railway line from Cape Town to Joburg. There's no reason to have 5 of them, you know. So it makes sense for those kind of monopolistic things to be controlled by a representative of what's supposed to be a representative of all the citizens in the country and all the private sector that's going to be using it. Otherwise, you're going to end up getting, you know, like a single company and private shareholders, and often they're foreign shareholders. And what happens is that the profit goes overseas, and then that's any profit that goes overseas ends up being it ends up meaning a forex deficit. A forex deficit means that we go more into debt. So what we need is local ownership of industries, and we need to have you know, stuff that's monopolistic, for instance. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see how it benefits us to have private shareholders running that. But
let me bring in Nick then.
Just let me just. I think. Well, I mean, I've been given like a minute to speak here.
Well, I'm going to bring in Nick. I want you guys to exchange thoughts on this. So don't mute yourself, because Nick, I wanted to bring you in because there's another aspect of this particular discussion. You know, and I get the I don't agree with it, but I get the sentiment about foreign ownership, because you often hear it a lot in this country. For example, on social media, there is the hashtag Put South Africans First movement, which almost talks a lot about this notion, albeit from different ideological places or origins, at least. Sorry, pardon me. But for me, it's almost irrelevant. You know, what you really want is an efficiency in the system that allows other private sector markets, invariably, the overwhelming majority of them will be local businesses, to benefit from the service so that the economy itself benefits. Or am I getting it wrong here? Or and is Buddy getting it wrong? Do you want to chime in and I'll let you guys have a quick exchange?
So the only thing I really care about is that individuals are free and prosperous. I don't care if they're South African. I don't care if they're American. I want people to be free, and I want them to be as rich as they can be with how much they produce and what they do with their lives. And the big problem with this idea that we don't want private foreign shareholders involved in these companies because it's going to siphon out the profits. It's kind of silly because I've studied ESCOM quite intensely, and during even as people call it golden age under apartheid, which no, it wasn't. It was not actually run that well then either. They borrowed a hang of a lot of money from the only people who could afford to fund them, which were foreign creditors. And now, because state-owned enterprises are inherently incompetent, because they do not have the price signals and the price mechanisms and the virtues of being a private sector business, which has the incentives to churn a profit, they are unable to truly make money. So they are going to constantly go into debt because there's literally no incentive to do a good job, because they know that they can either, under modern monetary theory, just print the money, or under most governments, just tax the money, and they're going to be paid regardless, because they're effectively just a more formalized version of these business forums, which are gangs which just extract revenue, and hopefully we might get something out of it.
I would agree with that. And Buddy, I'll let you respond just now. But Ivor, I want you to sharpen your tongue, please. I'll also have you come in on this one. But before any of you guys respond, it's just hit 9 o'clock. We're in the last half an hour of the show. We have 3 more topics that we're going to look at. If you're just joining us, welcome to it. Hit that like button, please. Let's get the engagement up. It's looking okay. It's looking okay, but get my likes up, people. Hit that like button and welcome to it. Maybe you just finished listening to Cyril Ramaphosa speak about bringing us down to level 3. We've been on the show, of course, so we haven't been keeping an eye on that. But shout out to you in the comment section. I've been putting you up, who is giving us updates on exactly what happened. We will also speak about that. So I'm going to ask my guests to just keep it short on this particular topic as we go into the issue of Cyril Ramaphosa. But Buddy, do you want to just quickly respond, and then I'll get Ivor?
Yeah, I'm quite curious. Are you guys pro-taxation of the private sector?
Taxation is theft.
So then why are you, so if you're pro-taxation, then why are you pro for SOEs to make a profit?
Because
SOEs can't make a profit. That's simple as that.
No, but if they,
for one,
they can. There are quite a lot of SOEs that do make it. There's about 700 SOEs in South Africa. Most of them make a profit. There have been a few that made a loss in certain years, and they've made profits in other years. But
so
the point that I'm making is that
sorry, buddy, I just want to quickly check that. Yes? That's actually not true. The overwhelming majority of SOEs in this country are loss-making and actually are a drain on the fiscus. Every year they come to Parliament asking for a bigger appropriation because they often.
But that's a few SOEs that are getting bailed out. It's ESCOM, it's SAA,
no, I'm not even talking bailout.
And it's large amounts. We've got 700 SOEs. But my point is, hold on a second. Yeah. Let me just make my point. Is that there've been years that SOEs have made a profit. There've been years that SOEs have made an income for government. There's been years that SOEs have made a loss and they've been bailed out. Which means basically when the SOEs are bailed out, what that is that the state is spending money into the private sector, and that's creating a private sector surplus. So when the state makes a profit and it's paying off its debt, what's happening is that private sector savings are being reduced. That's a fact of it. That's just a simple accounting fact, and you can argue and shake your head as much as you want, but it's
Chris,
the truth.
You want to respond? All right, hold on.
Yeah, I got to jump in real quick. So I'm going to go through DTs here. So it's not about profit or loss by state-owned enterprises. It's about the unfair, unreasonable, illegitimate, immoral competition by the government against the private sector. The government has all the resources. It knows all the rules. It makes the rules. It controls the courts. It controls all the systems. It can make a private sector competitor uncompetitive simply by its actions. And that's before we even talk about the corruption in the ANC and its deployment of cadres, morons who couldn't freaking find their way out of a freaking broom closet if someone gave them a freaking roadmap. I mean, this is corporate boards. Look at SAA. The whole board packed full of complete idiots who sign contracts at 10 times the cost so they can steal money. You trust government? No, this is unfair competition against the private sector. That's the issue here, not whether they're profitable or not. They're profitable because they cheat. Just like the Chinese, they cheat. They break all the World Trade Organization rules. That's why government,
Americans do the same.
I didn't say they didn't. I never said they didn't. You want me to dismantle them here? I'm happy to dismantle them here.
All right, let me go to Dumo and then Nick, and then I'll come back to you, buddy. Dumo, Nick, and then Buddy, and then Ivo, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I just got just one thing to say about this, and that's just the idea that the companies are not making profits because of governments not spending. I mean, if that's the case, then we might as well just go to the South African Reserve Bank and just say, hey, just give everybody a lot of money, and that way everyone will be profitable. I mean, so if that theory is correct, then that means that the reason why Eskom and them are not making money is because the government's not giving them enough money. That means every business that comes in that doesn't make money is because the government is not giving enough money. That doesn't make sense. The reason why these guys are not making money is because it's very simple. Their costs of operation is more than what is coming in, and that's the reason why.
Can I jump in there just to make a point?
So I must give Nick an opportunity. Then I'll come to you, then Ivo, and then we'll move on. Nick.
Cool. So 3 short things. Eskom up until the 90s, I think it was late 90s. In the Electricity Act that founded Eskom, they were not allowed to make a profit. They were legally not allowed to make a profit, which wouldn't have made much of a difference because they weren't making a profit anyway, and they're not doing so now.
They had the lowest electricity prices.
Yes, which was a problem, because the problem with that is it created unsustainable growth, which didn't reflect the reality of the situation. We see this with like the housing bubbles, when too many people are given subsidized housing loans, which means too many people are buying houses that then cannot be paid off, and then the entire system crashes. You can't lie to the economy. You can't lie with the market because it's going to come home to roost. The other thing is,
that's not the reason why they didn't invest.
Hang on, buddy.
If a state-owned enterprise is making a profit, it's either making a profit because it's crooking the books, which a lot of them do. I know the Eskom, when they reported the profit in the 90s, it's because they literally included the money that was sent to them by government as a subsidy as the part of their profits, which is not a profit. It's literally just shuffling your money around. It would be illegal if a private sector business did that. And secondly, if it is making a profit, it's doing so at the expense of actual productive institutions, which actually have price mechanisms, which aren't cheating, which are actually producing something which is valuable, rather than just basically cheating as a thug that has the guns that can basically point at someone and say, give me money so I can fund my vanity project. That's what a state-owned enterprise is at the end of the day. It's a vanity project at best, and it's a way to control people and to fund a dictatorship at worst, the commanding heights, as Lenin would call it.
Buddy, quick response, and I must go to Ivo, then we must move on to another topic.
I just, I don't know any big country in the world that's made a success for itself without state-owned enterprises. And the point of state-owned enterprises is that they don't need to make a profit, and therefore, if they are run efficiently, which in South Africa they're not, they can bring down the prices of production for the private sector producers, for the real economy. And that's the benefit of having state-owned enterprises. Whereas if you have a private sector that's making, that are and it's a monopoly, they tend to push up the prices because they need to make a profit. They want to make a profit for shareholders. So the thing about having these things run by the state is that you can actually bring down the costs if they run correctly. Now, if you look at South Africa, the problem that we're having with the inefficiency in this stuff is happening through the outsourcing channel. We're having the corruption and all that kind of stuff. Is all these multi-billion-dollar contracts and things that SOEs are signing with this company and that company and that company. It's a way. It creates a channel for corruption, and it creates a way that these rent-seeking state employees that are giving these contracts out can channel money to their connected friends, to executives and shareholders in these companies, and back to themselves in terms of bribes. And if the state was doing that in-house, in hiring the people, the engineers and the builders and stuff, that would be far more difficult to have corruption, because you'd have the guys designing the plants, building them, They'd be paid a salary, and it'd be very easy to check what's going on. What's happening now with these companies, it's like a free reign. Just about every state official is given a chance to outsource to whoever, you know,
But
and it's become
just on that point, buddy, because I think there's something you're missing here. You know, as to whether the state is involved through an entity that is run by it, or whether the state is involved as itself running the particular service, the corruption happens anyway, because the power is centralized in a single entity that has no competition. So, for instance, what's to stop that very same now nationalized industry that you argue should be rendering the services directly from having an official with power, in a position of power, hiring a whole bunch of his friends? Most friends not doing anything. You see this in most command economies where the state becomes inflatedly large. In fact, South Africa is one of those states where you can have literally people hired to do jack fiddly squats. So the corruption isn't eliminated simply because it's run by the state. But I did say, hang on. I did give say I'll go to Ivo. Dumo, you'll be next, and then we must move on. Ivo.
Sorry, I was muted there. You know, there's a few things I don't understand here. SAA is a good example. Chris mentioned it. You know, SAA for years has been using basically predatory pricing to push private competitors out of the market. Right? It's killed off about half a dozen different airlines that have started up over the years in the last 25 years. Now, the thing is, they do that because every year they go to government and they say, "Oh, please, can we have 5 billion rand? Because otherwise we're going to fail." So this is terribly unfair competition. All of the competitors to SA provide a better service, right, and are efficient. If the SA falls over, which it should, and has really, you know, there are private sector companies that will take over, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't care as a consumer, right? I don't care how much profit that company makes or where that profit goes.
Yep.
Right? That doesn't matter to me. Right? All I care about is that I can safely get from where I am to where I want to go at a reasonable price that I can afford. Right? If the guy is making too much profit, right, the people who care about that are likely competitors. Right? They look at that and say, "Oh, I want myself some of that profit." Right? So I'm going to start up a rival airline. And I'm going to undercut this guy because I want some of that profit, and that's how competition arises in order to erode away those profits. And this happens everywhere. Right? The idea of private sector monopolies is a bit of a myth. Monopolies exist only if states protect those monopolies.
That's right.
And the same with cartels. If there's a private sector company that looks like a monopoly, right, they aren't really. IBM used to be a monopoly. Right? Microsoft used to be a monopoly, right? They're not anymore, right? Because new companies come up. Microsoft kicked IBM's butt.
That's right.
You know, Apple kicked Microsoft's butt. Novell used to be a monopoly in networking software. When last have you heard of Novell? You know, these things in the free market, these things sort themselves out because there's always the possibility of competition arising and competition taking out someone who's controlling a market and is abusing their customers. MySpace used to be a monopoly, right? Now it's Facebook. You know, so I don't buy this whole idea that you know, things must be run by the state and can be better run by the state. And South Africa is a perfect example. Nothing the state runs well. Right? Alex Score, they've got a diamond mine, for God's sake, that loses money. How do you lose money digging diamonds out of the ground? Right? Why does the state dig diamonds out of the ground? Right? What possible reason could the state have? You know, is this a national security issue? Do we need diamonds to protect us from, I don't know, aliens with ray guns? This is absolutely insane. You know, the whole notion that the state needs to be doing these things. There are very few public goods where you could make a reasonable argument that says it needs to be a monopoly and it's better run by the state. You know, in most cases, it can be run by competing private industry, and if it can be, it should be.
Absolutely. Dumo, I don't know if you want to quickly add, but I must move us on, guys. We're very, very short on time. In the last 15 minutes, I might ask you guys to indulge me with another 15 minutes, but we'll cross that bridge just depending on what things look like at the end. But Dumo, just very quickly, a quick chime in, and then I'll move us on to Cyril Ramaphosa.
All right. I got to say, Ivo has mentioned almost everything that I wanted to say. Just one thing I just need to add with regards to the necessity of yes, apology accepted. Necessity of state-owned companies. I think Buddy said something along the lines of that. That the state-owned companies can drive the prices down if they run properly. But then the reality is that if you look at Eskom already, they are producing less electricity than 2010, and yet we're paying more for it. I mean, if this was a private company that did this, the Competition Commission would have been on them in a minute already.
Absolutely.
So the reality is that Eskom needs competition. I'm not saying they shouldn't exist. They just shouldn't be the only company running the thing. That's all.
Absolutely. Guys, I must move us on. And actually, I'm going to ask for those extra 15 minutes because there's two things under this theme which we haven't even looked at, but they played themselves out rather spectacularly this week, almost still sticking with the looting, the violence. And I know it sounds like we're harping on, but there's so many offshoots now that have developed. The one offshoot, and there's two we'll look at. The one is the alleged 12 instigators of the quote-unquote insurrection by the state. We were told it's insurrection. Initially, we were told it's a coup by the state. And then once they finally started bringing people to court to face charges, the nature of the charges weren't a crime against the state, as we'd expect, either sedition, a coup, or an insurrection, but just inciting public violence were the charges people were facing. One chap who was in court this week, one Sibusiso Mavuso, who was arrested on the 16th of July. He appeared in the one of the courts in Westernaria Magistrates Court. I'm just raising him because he was just one case out of many who appeared. Let me just quickly read the piece because it made for interesting reading. This chap, Mavuso, was vehemently shaking his head in the dock. That's in the Western Area Magistrates Court, as his case for alleged inciting public violence during the civil unrest was postponed yet again. Mavuso was making a second court appearance on Friday. This is that past Friday. He's charged with inciting public violence during the wave of civil unrest, which swept through, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng last week. His bail application was postponed due to the unavailability of the magistrates presiding over the matter. But here's where it gets interesting. There's over 1,700 people in custody amid this SA unrest, and nearly all of them are facing allegations of inciting public violence. Where are the insurrectionists? Where are the coup plotters? Ivo?
There aren't any. There are scapegoats.
Yeah.
Right. The Ramaphosa government has been deeply embarrassed by all of this. Right. They had no intelligence that any of this was going to happen. Even after it happened, the ministers of defense, state security, and police each had different views of actually what happened and who knew what when. Right? They had to be hauled over the coals, which I think happened yesterday, and they had a very, very hard talking to, apparently, which doesn't include firing any of them for their failures. There weren't any plotters. I mean, there were a couple of people who were on social media instigating. But seriously, is Carl Niehaus, is he this great statesman that's going to overthrow the government and lead the country?
Chris is laughing his ass off.
Or the Zuma twins, they spend all their time buying shoes in Dubai. I mean, they're not going to overthrow the government and run this place. Right? Yeah. All of these people that got arrested, right? Nobody's ever heard of them. Right? They are nobodies. Right? There is no plot. There is no insurrection. There is no coup. Right? This was simply public violence. The Zuma arrest was the spark for it. It's public violence born of many, many years of poverty and inequality and failure by the state to deliver basic services and failure by the state to even deliver its very what Nicolas mentioned. Its most basic purpose, which is providing security, protecting life, liberty, and property.
That's right.
Which it couldn't do. Right. But of course, Cyril Ramaphosa needs someone to blame. Right. So he's going to blame Zuma supporters for inciting an insurrection, and then he can claim credit for the insurrection having failed. This is absolute nonsense. This is just a deflection.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come to Chris Dumo, Bali, then Nick. Chris, again, as I said on my own stream, multiple things can be true at once, but you need the evidence for them. As I was making the argument that they very well could have been, for instance, initially, my initial assessment, they very well could have been some sort of instigating of the public violence in certain pockets, but you need the evidence for it. You still need the evidence for it. And this is where the government right now is coming up short, where it rounds up these people and it comes out with a big PR campaign. The guilty 12, the dirty dozen, we're basically told. They're about to appear in court. They'll face these insurrection charges. And then, as we say in KZN, Dololo, none of that crap. Instead, people are facing public violence charges. Again, we're being dribbled here, Chris, by the political elites, are we not?
Absolutely. Listen, I agree almost with everything wholehearted with Ivo said, and he said it so eloquently and so calmly, which I usually don't have that tenor. It was well said. If you go back and watch my streams from the outset of this, from the time that Zuma was declared guilty by the Constitutional Court, and then what I predicted was going to unfold afterwards, this is almost exactly what I predicted. So I find it astonishing that South African criminal intelligence, police intelligence, and that the military intelligence, the national intelligence agencies had no indication of this. Which is where I differ a little bit. It wasn't an insurrection, but there is a civil war within the side of the ANC, and there's either complicit actions on the part of people in the state security services who intentionally didn't inform people or held information back, or who played a role in this, because the party is split between a Zuma faction because these are the state capture, the tenderpreneurs, the people that want to get their hands on everything, and the rest of the party. I wouldn't call it the Ramaphosa faction because he's the better dressed, guy who's there. It's not like he's got a big support, and you see that in his selection of his cabinet, because he picked all these stalwart Zuma supporters like NDZ and Magashule, all these clowns to be in his cabinet. He should have started with his own. But yeah, there is definitely, and from when it was pretty patently obvious what was going on here. This is a golden opportunity to take the biggest cock up in the ANC's recent history, which is pretty impressive. They've screwed up quite a bit, but the biggest cock up in their recent history, to take this and spin this to advantage by taking out Zuma stalwarts. So what do we see happen? Carl Niehaus could have been arrested when he had a press conference for violating the lockdown, because no gatherings allowed. He could have been arrested up on the stage along with Magashule and with Zuma, but he wasn't, and all their supporters and followers. So what do they do? They go to escort the day after he's arrested, because they're unaware what's going to unfold that day, or they're ignoring it. And they arrest Carl Niehaus. He's the only person actually wearing a mask out there when he's talking to SABC. And he's trying to maintain social distance, but they keep crowding in on him. So, I mean, I don't like Niehaus. I mean, or as we call him now, Carl Nyhorse, he's a jackass. But the reality is that he was the only one actually trying to behave. And he's just being a typical nonsense. But there are 300 other people there that could have been arrested for violating lockdown. He's the only one arrested, fined 3,000. And then you see the guy, every single person, even Andile Lungiza, who's a felon, has actually been, charged with violating lockdown. He's a Zuma supporter. It couldn't be any more obvious. They're finding scapegoats, as Ivo said. There was no insurrection, but there is evidence here, and I'll end up here real quick. There's evidence here, which I point out from the very beginning, is that there definitely is something odd going on here, and I wouldn't put it beyond the fact that somebody instigated something to make this government look bad, because you don't take out telecommunications towers, dozens of them. You don't poison or attack a water supply station. You don't take out critical infrastructure. Radio stations ransacked. What, people eating? We're being told it's about hunger. You don't loot radio stations. There's no food there. There's not even any televisions for you to take home with no electricity to watch. So there is clearly critical infrastructure was attacked. The N3 was the first place attacked. That wasn't coincidental. Trucks looted. The major artery into Southern Africa is just disrupted. The port is attacked. They even, as I predicted, I warned people, if they didn't control this, OR Tambo and King Shaka would be attacked. OR Tambo was never attacked, but King Shaka was attacked, but it was repelled by the police. This was clearly something more than just people were hungry and people were looting, because it was targets of opportunity. There is something going on here. We just don't know who. I am not in South Africa. I am 6,000 miles away, but I am an intelligence analyst, and I've spent decades in the intelligence community, and there's something going on here. And I didn't have signals intercepts snitches on the streets in Durban or Pietermaritzburg to be able to make this prediction accurately on June 29th. Case closed.
Look,
Neither did the police.
I know exactly where you're going. Let me quickly preempt it. A lot of the.
But I did.
I do, as I said before, I'll give you a chance. Don't get me wrong. I will give you a chance. Multiple things can be true at once. However, the evidence must lead the claim. And when it comes to, for example, a lot of that infrastructure you're talking about, some of the telecommunications companies themselves came out and said, actually, no, it wasn't so much that they were being targeted and destroyed, but actually it was the inability to maintain their systems due to the violence that prevented them from fixing it and blah, blah, blah. For example, if there is load shedding, there's a lot of our cell phone towers now have generators and they need to be refueled quite often. And they couldn't get to them, for example, so there is in the murkiness of the looting, the violence, and the public destruction, there are rational explanations for why some of these facilities were destroyed. I don't have an answer, perhaps, for radio stations. That one for me was suspicious, especially because some of these radio stations were not, it didn't make sense. But as I said before, that multiple things can be true at once, but the evidence must lead. I want to come to you just to maybe expand on that point very quickly. Then must be Dumo, Buddy, and then Nicolas. Ivo, just expand on that point.
I think you're quite right. I'm trying to look for the article now that it was on News 24, where they basically debunked the notion that there was all these orchestrated attacks on infrastructure. Here and there, that probably happened, cell phone towers and so on, but there were no attacks on water infrastructure. Most of the cell phone towers that went down simply because because of the damage done to surrounding infrastructure, power failures and so on. So the notion that this was really this orchestrated attempt to sabotage South Africa, even that sort of falls flat when you start looking into the details. It just Frans Cronje says the reason they had no intelligence on what was going to happen was because there was no plotting. There weren't any. There were people that jumped on the bandwagon when they saw the violence starting to happen. They jumped on the bandwagon and they started encouraging it. But there wasn't this great plot to destabilize the country or to destabilize the government. I don't buy that.
But I do have slight reservations insofar as just pushing this aside completely, because there are some things, I just put it on screen, for example. I think the chaos was useful to certain individuals who do or are on the planning spectrum. Now, their planning is shit, don't get me wrong. Wow, I just swore on my show. Yes. The planning is trash. But they definitely used the ensuing chaos to target specific facilities, mostly to steal. I think it was mostly the stealing and not necessarily destroying those facilities, because a lot of the things that you rightly say, Ivo, were debunked. For example, the destruction of the water plant, the Msunduzi and Etigwini come out and say, guys, this is hogwash. Nothing of the sort happened. I think it's quite right. Where there's no evidence, we should not be making these claims. I did say Dumo, Buddy, and then Nick, and then we must move on to discussing Ramaphosa himself, because, oh my goodness, there's a lot to be said, not only in terms of how he acted in this current period, the lack of leadership, but also the announcements he made tonight of level 3. And this growing notion in the country, which I welcome, that Cyril's actually a bit of a loser. But Dumo, let me come to you, and then Buddy, and then Nick.
Right. I won't be too long on this because I want to speak about Ramaphosa as well. So what I will say...
Dumo, can I interrupt you? I want to just introduce something else here,
cool.
just to get it out the way in terms of the final thing I wanted to look at this issue. And that's what's happening in Phoenix and what we've been seeing in the past week of politicians, the political elites, and the mainstream media drumming up this anti-Indian, anti-minorities rhetoric and hiding it behind the Phoenix incident and saying the Phoenix massacre we're hearing, for example, and pushing and grinding out narratives which to the credit of the South African police services, they've actually been rather active on social media in helping debunk and saying, actually, guys, shut the F up, allow us to investigate this and bring perpetrators to book. Stop pushing out these narratives of, you know, Indians were systematically targeting blacks and blah, 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 blah. But maybe as you respond, add that component, and I'll give everybody a chance to comment on that too.
All right. Okay. With regards to the insurrection, it's very hard to believe right now. But I will take your stance on that. That, well, as the evidence comes in, then the opinion will change. I just feel that there is an element of public violence involved, which I will agree with Ivo there, and I also will agree that there was some opportunism of many kinds. So maybe there were some people that tried to destroy the cell phone towers. But also at the same time, that destruction could have came from damage from other infrastructure as well, and so forth. So I won't disregard either theory, but both sound plausible at this point in time, and only time will tell who is correct. And then with regards to the Phoenix massacre, on the Manpatria podcast, episode 97, it's coming out tomorrow. We did speak about this, and then I just said that, look, I don't want to dive into the issue too much, because when I went to it because I first saw it on Twitter, and the first tweet I saw was race baiting, then I just left. Because I thought, you know what, this is, if I comment on this, I might have egg on my face, because given, you know, we've seen what happened on Twitter in the past. Ashwin Willemse, you know, on that whole Super Sport incident, and everybody was on his side. And then guess what? They found no racism. Then now we got Andre de Ruyter as well. You know, and then everyone was like, guys are racist. And then guess what? No racism. So I'm not saying this is going to be another one of those. I'm just saying, let's just rather wait for the evidence, and I'll wait for that.
Absolutely. And I'm putting on screen some guys who live in KZN, Durban, just chipping in saying, guys, no, hang on. There have been some cases of destruction of state infrastructure that serves them. As I said, guys, as I personally said, multiple things can be right and true at once, but the evidence and the data must lead them. I did say Buddy, sorry, and I'll get to Nick, and then I'll give everybody else chances to chime in on this issue of what we're seeing, for example, the race baiting, and the singling out of minorities as somehow having been the biggest problem, or the problem during that period. And I must say this, Indians are being there, and I did warn people on my social media that they will come after the minorities who dared to stand up for themselves, to protect themselves during a crazy period where everybody actually said, you know what, we recognize we're on our own. There'll be no government to save us here. Buddy, your quick thoughts before you do that. Guys, there's 500 of us now watching. I think a lot of you have come over from the Cyril discussion. Please hit that like button. Keep my engagement, please, over 50%. I only have 160 likes. Let's get them to 250, please. As you're listening to me talk right now, hit that like button. I've added another 15 minutes. We're going to end at 9:45 on the stream. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Buddy, that grifting, that race grifting we're seeing here, it's very dangerous. It's very inflammatory. We've seen the EFF embark on it, with Malema basically chastising Indians as somehow being inherently racist, and they were just waiting for their moment to kill blacks indiscriminately on the streets. The ANC Youth League today did effectively the same thing. It went on a tour of Phoenix, the various institutions, the police station, the morgue and the like. And again, the rhetoric, they even went as far as to saying, stop with this, what did they say? Stop with this Rainbow Nation talk and how minorities are not to blame, or they said actually how Indians hate blacks and there's racial tension in KZN, is how they put it. There seems to be a concerted effort to cast out certain racial groups, paint them as a single block, and to chastise and attack them for more political purposes than the supposed quest for justice.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it through the lens of this extreme poverty and inequality that we have in South Africa, and unemployment. And, you know, I think it was FDR that was saying that, you know, he said that show me a nation where people are, I'm paraphrasing, but where people are unemployed and desperate, and I'll show you a nation that's ready for a populist dictator, you know. we have a serious inequality problem and poverty, unemployment problem in South Africa. And we really need to kind of examine the roots of this. And if we don't, we're going to have people, we don't know who they are, we don't know much about it, but we're going to have people exploiting that. People are desperate, they're angry, and I implore you guys to actually step away from the ideology and stuff around money and things like that, and actually look at the reality of how things actually are working in the world at the moment. I know that you'd love to have a gold standard and all that kind of stuff, but we're working in a fiat currency.
Buddy, I must jump in because you're slightly off topic. And we need to keep on just for the sake of the flow. But
well, I think
again,
I'm getting to a point. My point is that
but I need to be a little quicker because we're already running on in overtime here.
Okay.
Because there is a conversation to be said here, buddy, around the inflammatory language we're seeing at the moment. I mean, this deserves your attention. I mean, you have fellow Indian South Africans who are sleeping in terror tonight because there are voice notes circulating, the same instigator crowd that we heard, for example, throughout the looting, saying, yeah, tomorrow we're going to render the city, we're going to shut it down, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Those same voice note-esque incitement is now being targeted at Indian South Africans, and I'm putting it to you, buddy, directly, that politicians in this country, especially those who are broadly on the left spectrum, EFF, ANC, ANC Youth League, are playing into this, are further exacerbating these flames, and no one seems to be saying, actually, hold on, let's temper this. Firstly, stop with the race baiting, stop with the targeting of minorities, and let's let the law enforcement deal with this issue. It's been the police, ironically, who have done more work to say, guys, stop with the instigating of this racial violence. Let us as law enforcement deal with this, investigate and make some arrests. To that particular point, let me just give you some numbers. This is from a media statement from the South African Police Services, and I did give them props and kudos online to this because it's a very important issue, buddy. I need you to stay on topic on this. In relation to the Phoenix murders, this is the media release from the Office of the National Commissioner of Police. In relation to the Phoenix murders, police can confirm that 8 suspects have thus far been arrested. 1 has already appeared in court and his case remanded to the 16th of August, while the other 7 suspects are expected to appear in court tomorrow. That's the 26th of July. Some of these suspects are allegedly connected to more than one murder case, whilst others face charges relating to attempted murder, malicious damage to property, and of course, defeating the ends of justice. But this is the key here, buddy. And Nick, I want you to listen in also because you'll chime in here too. Social media users have been cautioned to refrain from circulating and spreading inflammatory messages that seek to incite violence and fuel tensions amongst communities. The incessant spreading of such fake news and malicious posts will not be taken in this regard. Here's the kicker. This is where it surprised me, and I gave SAPS, the police, the props. In this regard, at least 5 suspects in the past week have been arrested in different parts of the country for recording and creating inflammatory messages and circulating them on social media with the intention of spurring up violence. It's very telling that the police that we often slate for not, being on top of things, not being sharp, have actually done a better job of trying to calm tensions when the politicians themselves are not doing this. Are we seeing a lack of leadership here, buddy? What's going on?
I think the leadership from the president, I'm not an ANC supporter, but I think that he's been pretty much, trying to calm the situation down. I think, I'm against, racial tensions and things like that. I would love to see harmony and things like that happening. I think that it's overall to talk about the symptoms and to deal with them. And yes, the symptoms need to be dealt with. People need to be taken into account for these kind of inflammatory statements and stuff like that. But what the real focus should be on is what's causing it. What's causing this inequality and stuff. And if we keep ignoring the causes of it and pretend that that the systems that we have in place are working and are going to, the national development plan, all this kind of stuff that's based on neoliberal stuff that's going to reduce inequality and stuff. It's not. So we're gonna end up with the same problems. The inequality is going to get worse. Poverty is going to get worse, and unless we actually understand the way the monetary system works and start utilizing it for the benefit of our productive sectors, for the productive private sector, instead of for the financial sector, which is what's happening now, we're going to continue to have this extraction of value from South Africa, and we're going to get more and more businesses going bang. We're going to get more and more unemployment, and we're going to have more and more tension, and that's just the way that it's just an obvious thing that's going to happen.
Sure. Nick, I must bring you in maybe as the final commenter, and we must move on to Cyril, because obviously there's a lot to be said about him. As I said, there's a changing mood that I could pick up in the last week and a half or so from ordinary South Africans. If you listen to, for example, commentary in, on talk radio, letters being written in, but where there isn't a change has been with the mainstream media who still praise them. But just maybe as your final say on this, because I even put up a comment here from Sagi Pillay. He says, I live in Phoenix. There are thousands of black South Africans in Phoenix every day, and there is no racial tension. Some people believe only in, pardon me, the unrest. What's BS? And I must co-sign that because I have relatives who live in Phoenix. One of my grand aunts lives in Phoenix. Her whole family is in there. And again, her neighbors are every time we go visit her, we know the neighbors. There's a strong relationship. It often seems that it is the political elites who play up the racial differences, and we're seeing that on social media, where it's been the political elites, the politicians who want there to be a race war so that they can justify their own existence, or rather particularly their own political rhetoric on this issue. Or is my assessment wrong? Chris, I'll bring you in here in a moment.
So
Nick, first, Chris.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I was going to do this in a different order, but I'd like to address what you just said first. It's definitely that the political elites want to have a scapegoat to allow people to ignore their own failures, as well as to justify their own existence. And also because it's a lot of the time we just ignore a lot of our elites. It's just the basic ideology. The collectivists who believe in a racialized world, a tribalistic world, and they want to make that reality. But it's also not unusual to South Africa, or even now. This is not the first attack on the Indian community in South Africa. We've seen it over the past century. And I think there's this obsession among many South Africans to try to see this insurrection, which I was calling it shutdown SA, but there's plenty of these names on Twitter. I don't think anyone can agree to on what to call it. But I think there's this obsession of wanting to see it as an outlier, as something different. But besides its scale, I don't think it's different. The riots and looting and what a lot of people call the political correct term is service delivery protests are par for the course in many parts of South Africa. The difference here is scale. What we see plenty of riots and protests just erupt into just looting, of tearing down trucks and taking goods, and also just destroying for the sake of destruction. I wrote an article years ago about the Feesmasville protests titled "Protesting for Fun," where people just destroy things completely unrelated to their cause because, let's face it, a lot of people like destroying things. It must be fun to just take a nice hammer and start smashing windows. I don't enjoy it, but plenty of people probably do. And I think that where the racial aspect comes into this is that it's easy to exploit and target a minority, especially a minority that you see as alien. This is why there's plenty of xenophobia in South Africa. And that a lot of people, spurred on by political elites, love to project their own failure onto someone else. We saw this with the Jews in Russia and Nazi Germany. And we see it in South Africa all the time, that someone sitting somewhere without a job sees a enterprising Indian or enterprising Somali immigrant, and they probably think, oh no, it's their fault that I'm not rich. And no, it's the fault of the government for creating a environment where you can't actually work or produce wealth.
Absolutely. Yo, guys, we're running out of time here. And again, I'm a polite chap, so I must ask before I assume. We already should be capping the show off here, but can we please call another 15 minutes and really close it off then? Because there's only one more topic anyway for us to chew on. So the show is going to end at 10 p.m. Sanbonani Molo. Hello, how's it? Welcome to it. You're watching Liberty and Friends. There's 500 of us in here, only 189 likes. Come on, guys, smash that like button. Do it now as I waffle away here and buy time for my guests to just prepare themselves for the last topic. Hit that like button. I want us to reach the 250 likes mark. We're going to end in about 15 minutes. Chris, again, you've got that benefit of having the outsider looking in advantage as an American. You know, unfortunately, Chris, you're putting your ear to the front. I don't know if you can't hear us. All right, the lack of response suggests that Chris is not quite with us. I'm going to give him a moment. He's muted. Let me see if I can unmute him. Chris, we can't hear you.
That's because I was on mute. My phone was at 2%. Okay, we weren't supposed to go this long, so I had to plug in the cord. It's the same anyway. So go ahead. Question, real quick.
All right. Thanks for that, and thank you so much for indulging us, Chris. But guys, you know, Chris, as I was saying, you've got that benefit, brother, of being an outsider looking in as an American. But a lot of these concepts are also relatable to you, man, because we as Americans see what's happening in your part of the world, and that race politics is definitely infecting not only South Africa and has been infecting South Africa, but we're seeing it in your part of the world too. This idea that certain politicians play up each different race groups against each other. It's toxic stuff.
Absolutely. And first off, let me start off. All of this is right down to the lack of leadership across the board in the bureaucracy and the government of the ANC. Cyril Ramaphosa couldn't lead a creche of preschoolers to get free ice cream at lunchtime, let alone lead a country. He's a complete buffoon. And anybody that fell for the Ramaphoria nonsense is a sucker. I said it wasn't true. You give me $400 million worth of equity 30 years ago, and I'll turn into $4 billion, not $400 million 30 years later. The guy's got no clue what he's doing. The race politics is disturbing. It's quite vile and disgusting. It is always the ammunition of the idiots, the uninformed, and the dishonest. People, you know, there's only one race. We're Homo sapiens. Enough of the bullshit. Knock it off. We're all the same, just some slight differences in appearance and different cultures. Cultures where the difference is. You want to attack something, attack people's culture, but I don't agree with attacking people's culture. As long as their culture isn't harmful, let people have their own culture. This is infecting the U.S. in so many ways. It's utterly ridiculous, and it winds up in bizarre outcomes. Very quickly, before my phone dies, we just had 414 members of the House of Representatives vote to approve the Juneteenth holiday. That's ridiculous. Juneteenth is not. It shouldn't be a holiday. Now, that's supposedly to celebrate the end of legal slavery in America, but that's not when legal slavery ended. That's when some two-star general in the Union Army showed up in Texas and said, I'm here now, and I'm enforcing the President's Emancipation Proclamation from 2 years ago. Well, there were still people in slavery in Texas. Now, Texas rightly celebrates it as a state holiday. That's fine. But why the country celebrate? It's just pandering, and it's race politics. If you want to celebrate the end of legal slavery in America, you celebrate the 6th of December, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was fully ratified by enough states to make it illegal to own people in this country. That's when you do it. And so, but this infects everything. This woke nonsense. It's always easy to turn people. I get a kick last year at Chile on my channel when it was growing like crazy. The original channel was censored by Putu. On that channel, and I had these people come on, these race-baiting bigots and racists in South Africa, and say, oh, all your moderators are just cutting people off because they're all old white people. You know, I do Zoom sessions with my moderators, and the first one I did was not too long after that, and it turns out that half my moderators, whom I'd never met, I just seen them interact in the chat, and I trusted them based on information. Oops, I'm gone.
Oh, we just lost Chris. All right, we'll give him a chance to get back in the background. Oh man, we'll give him a chance to get back in the moment, but I must move us on, guys, to that final topic I spoke about, and really it's a rather topical one, and maybe a lot of people wanted to hear, you know, what we thought about it. I'm just watching the comment section, guys. Chris will be back. I'm sure he has to sort himself out. Fellas, Cyril Ramaphosa, the leader, the president of this country, has come under a lot of pressure from the public. Joe Soap, the public, who perhaps people are beginning to take on that mantra I often use of hashtag politicians are trash. The darling Cyril Ramaphosa that was sold to us has come under a lot of pressure from the public. As I said, if you're listening to talk radio, pardon me, if you're watching the letters section of newspapers, and if you even had your ear to the ground, it seems ordinary people realize that Cyril is not the good a leader that we're being sold by the mainstream media. And there was a brief moment, I will begin with you, a brief moment where in the mainstream we saw a critical take to the president and his failure of leadership over this period, but it was almost business as usual once again after that, back to fawning over Cyril and saying, oh, look at how great he was in keeping Jacob Zuma in prison, or look at how great he was in him hitting the streets, being surrounded by a phalanx of bodyguards and not actually engaging anybody. He's so great, Ivo. He's so fantastic. In fact, the choice articles, and I want to put it up on screen, that I sort of just flagged and I screenshot, they're smart enough not to overtly praise him, but they still hold on to that, oh, Ramaphosa's different. We just need to double down on supporting him so that he doesn't become a dud or a lame duck and that he can lead this transformational change. I'm just going to put it on screen, fellas, so just bear with me. Some of the headlines. A piece by Mbazima Shilawa, Ramaphosa shouldn't waste this crisis, or he can risk becoming a dud, as if he isn't that already, given how ordinary people are talking about him. Another piece, which I just forget now where it was, and I clipped it out, was South Africa, land of the lawless. Let's prioritize South Africa's underlying socioeconomic problems. Again, making the argument that Cyril should lead this charge. And of course, South Africa's rebellion and looting. The political courage is needed to address the security dilemma, to avoid being held hostage by rogues. Again, this weird, incessant belief that the current status quo can lead us out of the mess it created.
Look, on Ramaphosa, I've said the same thing right from the start. When he first became president, I said he's not going to be our messiah. He's socialist. He's a dyed-in-the-wool ANC. Sort of apparatchik. This whole New Dawn idea, it's just nonsense. It's not going to happen. And I think people are now starting to see it. They've realized that there is no reform coming. He's done nothing. He is a lame duck. And I've noticed some really strange people sort of come to this realization. It's Rebecca Davis in the Daily Maverick. She said, I previously did not have a libertarian bone in my body. I had to ponder the question, what actually is the point of a government?
Mm-hmm.
What is the point of a government when we know that it was private security and ordinary civilians who held the line this past week? Now, for someone like Davis to say that, it's a serious sort of road to Damascus experience or conversion in a way. Adrian Basson said, good people of South Africa, you are on your own. I think people are starting to realize that this is just not a government that is competent. This is not a government that is capable. It cannot do the basics, and that to me, and it keeps coming back to that. If you can't do the basics of protecting lives and property, you cannot expect to run a successful economy. You cannot expect to run a successful country. You're going to end up with people splitting up into militias. The militias are going to go to war against each other. You're going to have the taxi industry, which we're not going to speak about tonight, I think, because we don't have time. But it's the same sort of thing. You end up with mafia organizations fighting each other and shooting each other because the government cannot keep the peace. The government cannot protect private property. This is really where the core of the whole issue. And Ramaphosa has just shown that he is weak. That first speech of his on Monday of the looting was really weak tea. He made a better speech later on in the week, but the damage was done. The guy Absolutely. Had no clue. He had no handle on it. He didn't understand what was going on, and the people in his cabinet certainly had no clue what was going on. And I think that realization, it's just hit everyone very hard that, Ramaphosa is not here to save us. The government's not here to save us.
Let me stick with you, Ivor, because there was two distinct issues, and I'll get to everybody, guys. Just give me a moment. There's two distinct issues which really exposed Ramaphosa as the supposed commander-in-chief of the armed forces and law enforcement in this country, and two distinct community groupings that just saw his failure firsthand. That was, of course, the KZN, Gauteng, communities who went through the looting. And of course, as we discussed this week on the BDL show, the taxi violence that plagued the Cape Town and the Western Cape over the past week and really has been going on since the beginning of the year. Really, 80 South Africans have died in Cape Town at the hands of this ongoing taxi violence here in this province. And the question ordinary Cape Townians ask themselves, as ordinary Durbanites, as ordinary Joburgers ask themselves is, where is the president? Where is the law enforcement? I mean, they've made law enforcement by way of the police and the defense force their responsibility solely. So where was it? Where was it to protect our life, our liberty, and our property rights?
It's just not there, and that with the taxi industry, that goes back to the late 80s. When the industry was radically deregulated, and it was, and I said on your show on Wednesday night, it was almost a libertarian's wet dream. There was no regulations. Anyone could get a permit. All you had to show was that you could drive a car, that you had a roadworthy vehicle, and there was one other thing, but it was a complete free-for-all. Now that's okay if you can actually keep the peace, if you can actually have the police to protect private property rights, but they couldn't. Right? So a few years later, the ANC is now in power, and they decide, okay, they need to re-regulate the taxi industry, and all they do is they reconfirm the mafia-style organization that had already been established. So they gave the associations the power to decide who gets taxi operating licenses. Right? They can keep their competitors out. They keep the monopolies that they claim on routes, which is really, you shouldn't have monopolies on routes in a free country. Exactly. But the police simply couldn't enforce that. The police couldn't stop people from going to war over routes. So they said, all right, you have monopolies over routes. And to this day, taxi operator licenses specify which routes the taxi operators can drive. And so it goes back a very, very long way. And that's exactly what happened now in Cape Town, with some illegal operators and two taxi associations fighting over a single route. It's because it was established in such a way that the thing runs like a mafia, and the police, Chris mentioned it earlier, it took the FBI in America to break the back of the mafia. Right? We need something like a Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, to go to war against the taxi mafias, and to break the mafias, right? And to wrest control of the streets back from these lawless criminal organizations.
Absolutely.
And you see it with the looting. I mean, the guys, you walk into a shop, grab a TV, nobody does anything. Police aren't going to stop. Police aren't going to stop you. Right? Police listlessly, if they are there, they listlessly sort of say, "Shoo, shoo." Please don't do that. The mayor of Durban puts out a statement. "Oh, guys, please don't do this. This is not very nice. It's going to hurt us." I'm sorry. What kind of leader is that? You're begging the criminals, please not to commit crime.
And Dumo and Buddy, pardon me. Dumo and Buddy, I must come to you chaps because I'm just keeping an eye on time, guys. We're already running over time, so let's just play it as it is now. We'll write this one as final comments. Guys, there's something to be said here around a country which is so disillusioned, a country which is basically saying, on this basis, if we, the ordinary chaps, are telling you that we've lost faith in the here and now, at least we've lost this faith in this guy who you, as the mainstream media, as the political elites, are selling us as this wonderful leader. Give us a damn opportunity to show you our disillusionment in an election, and it bodes ill that you have that same government who is then telling you, actually, maybe we need to postpone elections, citing various other reasons, including, of course, COVID-19. It does seem like there's a growing chasm a us versus them between ordinary citizens who are keen to get their voice out and for change, and the political elite who are saying, actually, no. Let's keep the status quo. In fact, we need time to convince you that the status quo is fantastic, and we'll move the elections to February. Dumo, and then Buddy.
Yeah, so it's a very sad state of affairs, really. I mean, just going back to the Ramaphosa point, I just feel that I think Ramaphosa said something along the lines that he will rather sort out the ANC first before South Africa, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but basically put ANC before South Africa. And you know what the ANC wants? They want to introduce the National Democratic Revolution, and that is basically all that we're seeing now is playing into that. You know, I think ultimately Ramaphosa, he is committed to the NDR. He's not committed to South Africans. So for me, those speeches that he made are just nothing more than just a mere inconvenience. You know, he could be doing something else. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about that. I just think that the status quo is not good. And also he wants to introduce this universal basic income or basic income grant. And obviously that's not a good thing, given the fact that we already have 18 million people reliant on grants in this country, which is much more than the people that are working and so forth. So it's not looking good. Ramaphosa has lost control. He doesn't know what's going on, and also he's too far away from the problems. And when ordinary people like us speak out against it, we just get ignored.
You know, and this is what frightens me, Buddy. You know, we're reaching a point where there does seem to be a growing chasm. I don't care where you stand on the ideological spectrum. It does seem, though, that there is a growing chasm between who I like to broadly call the political elites and their buddies in the mainstream media, who often are the fan club, and ordinary South Africans who are just frustrated by a state of things. Let's leave aside the solutions or the interventions, but talk to me how you see, how you experience what you've been seeing as a growing chasm amongst your own friends, perhaps, what you've been reading online. This growing chasm, if you will, I don't know how else to express it.
Look, I don't have much to say about that. You know, I think people are disillusioned, and that's a fact. You know, but I think if I have to make my closing comments, I just say investment. You know, investing in our people. That's what we need to do, and we need to forget about this false constraint that we've been given about that we don't have the money to do it. We do, and this excuse that it's going to lead to Weimar and Zimbabwe and all that kind of stuff is not true. That investing in our people, investing in people has never led to hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is caused by forex shortage. That's in Weimar Republic. There was a huge foreign debt in Zimbabwe. There was a foreign debt as well, a forex debt. Venezuela, the same thing. If you lose your export income, and you have a forex shortage, and you end up printing money in order to import stuff, you're going to get hyperinflation. If you're creating money, if you're issuing currency to invest productively in your people, in education, in productive employment, in infrastructure, and that kind of stuff, you're going to attract investment. You're going to crowd in investment, and that's what we need to do. And we need to forget, because if we don't do that, we're going to actually end up becoming dirt poor, and all our assets and businesses and things like that are going to get bought by investors from overseas who are borrowing money at 0% that's been issued by the trillion by their central banks. And we're going to think that we're clever in not doing that, and we're going to end up being owned, basically.
All right, that's Buddy Wells. Nick, let me come to you, and take me into your thought process here, Nick, as an additional point here. Sticking with the Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africans who are maybe on another stream listening to him speak tonight, we obviously weren't because we're here, heard him then say, "Oh, I'm back, I'm in front of your screens," family meeting crap, that annoying expression that he uses that suggests that somehow politicians are our family, even as they destroy our lives and livelihoods. But anyway, that same guy then says, "Well, you know what? I'm bringing us down to level 3. You're allowed now, dear pleb, to drink in a bar or in a pub or to have a drink at home to buy. You're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to do this. It seems to me that the disillusionment that Ubali speaks about, and he's quite right, South Africans are disillusioned with this guy, is beginning to have real world effects. I won't name the restaurant, but I went out for lunch today with a friend. Well, they had the lunch. I was just there. And I asked the question, are you serving, I don't drink myself, but I just asked just to see, are you serving alcohol? Is the question I asked. And the waitress looks around a little bit and says, yes, that'll be a maybe in the yes, in the maybe, but yes, affirmative. And I was like, I mean, I had a little laugh at that, because obviously, for those who aren't aware, alcohol had been banned in South Africa up until today. It's been opened again from tomorrow. But the point she then made when we discussed this was nearly all of the restaurants in this particular area were actually serving alcohol and had been for weeks prior to this. There is a growing dissent among South Africans, which is actually quite delicious to see. And at the heart of it is the recognition that we're not led in this country. Ramaphosa is as a weak leader.
Completely. I think it's my closing statement, and it just links to all of this, is when Ramaphosa replaced Zuma, people saw him, especially white middle-aged women from Constantia who don't understand the real world, saw him jogging in Sea Point and said, he's one of us, he's a great human who's going to deliver us from the Zuma scourge. But they forgot that this guy wasn't a newbie. This guy wasn't some just foreign agent who'd just been placed here to fix the ANC's troubles. He's been a part of the ANC from day one, and he has overseen and been a part of every single corruption scandal, every single bit of cadre deployment, every single bad regulation and bad policy. He is a part of the problem, and he's became a messiah to people because they desperately were looking for one. But I think now the disillusionment is that they've seen a failed messiah. To many people, if Ramaphosa was their God, God is dead, or even worse than that, God is impotent. And I think in a lot of ways that has destroyed people's faith. And that is where the disillusionment comes from.
Absolutely. No, fellas, I'm sorry. I must cap us off at this one. I'm really, really sorry. We've run out of time, but that's the nature of Liberty and Friends. Maybe as we just close off, very quickly, everybody, please, how do the people reach you? What are your social media details? How do the people reach you? And what will you be writing about this week? Ivo, I'll begin with you. You're muted, Ivo. Just unmute yourself.
Right, that better.
Yep.
I'm going to have a look at universal basic income. A lot of people have sort of suggested, oh, well, we need to do something about all the poverty and inequality, so the country doesn't explode every now and again. Let's give everyone lots of money. So I'm going to have a look at what the benefits of that would be, and more importantly, what the adverse economic consequences of that would be. So I'm going to try and unpack that a little bit.
Excellent. So that is Ivo, of course. You can find his writing on various publications, including The Daily Friend and Rational Standard, actually. I think you're also on there, Ivo, occasionally. That's Ivo Vegter, of course, and thank him for being on. Dumo, how do the folks reach you on Manpatria, and what can we expect from the Manpatria show this week?
Right. We are on our 97th episode. It's going to be released tomorrow at 7 o'clock. We spoke about a lot of stuff, and yeah, guys, please watch it. It's a really cool show. I'm also going to be releasing another video this week on interest rates. Funny enough, we're talking about money and stuff like that. So I'll be talking about interest rates and how they affect people's purchasing patterns. And that'll be on the Austrian Perspective show, which will be airing, I think, on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So check that out there. And if you want to see us on social media, please just go to our website, manpatria.com, and you'll find everything about us over there. Thanks.
Absolutely. That is Dumo, Denga, the host of the Manpatria show. Buddy, firstly, thank you very much for joining us. I did say it would be a hot seat to an extent, but there's clearly particular issues that you want to talk about. I think I'll happily invite you to discuss them on the show when we discuss those particular issues, and we can unpack them a little better. But how do the people reach you? What are your socials?
So I'm at BuddyWells1 at Twitter, and I have economics thinking blog. It's called Economics Thinking, and it's buddywells.wordpress.com. And you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/buddywells. Patreon.com/buddywells. Thank you. And thanks for having me, Sinclair. Really appreciate it.
Man, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's been an interesting discussion.
As I did
thanks
say to you on social
everyone.
media, I never say no to anybody who disagrees with me.
I
really appreciate you coming on, buddy. Super appreciate that. That's Buddy Wells. And last but not least, Nick Woode-Smith. Nick, how do the folks reach you? What are your platforms and what are you looking at this week? Let me unmute you, Nick. Okay, now we can hear you.
So you can reach me on the Rational Standard, which is rationalstandard.com. There will be a follow us little menu at the top where you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and you can also join our Telegram group. It's public. For me, I'll be writing first an article further responding to the debate on communitarianism in South Africa, which I think is an intellectually bankrupt idea because most people don't understand what it is, and if they did, they wouldn't follow it.
I look forward to that.
And I'll also be continuing to write the 14th book of my urban fantasy series because that's my actual job. I write fantasy books, which you can find on Amazon.
Lovely. Absolutely lovely. Chaps, thank you very much. That is my panel for the week. As I say goodbye to all of them right then. Of course, thank you, dear viewers, for watching. Man, you guys really make the show. I really appreciate every single one of you. On your way out, please make sure you hit that like button. Look forward to the Big Daddy Liberty Show this Wednesday, 7 p.m. I will bring you some interesting content this week too. And of course, next week, I'll see you next week, Sunday, for another episode of Liberty and Friends. Let me just see what the comment section is looking like. Umsizi Sishi, shout out to you, Mfoga Sishi, for enjoying the show. I appreciate you for being on, my brother. Stacey Montgomery, thank you, BDL. I see you. Werner Ruth saying buy jewelry. I'm not sure what for. Might be responding to someone else. Janine Smith, thanks, guys. We see you over on Facebook. That Don Kitten, thank you for being very lively and engaging this evening on YouTube. And Robert, I see you with the comment. Lars Solis, shout out to you too. And a reminder, guys, I'm still on the streets. Lars Solis actually just reminding me now. Remember, half of what I do is literally advocacy work. I'm in communities here in Cape Town a lot, poorer communities, informal settlements, talking to people about some of the ideas that we often talk about on the show. So don't think that this is all that I do, that I just talk on a talk show. No, this is half of what I do. The lion's share is advocacy, where I go into a lot of these communities where people won't, for example, watch the show, and I talk about these ideas of how we can bind a faith, flag, family, and freedom type society and a free society, a prosperous and property owning one. So guys, your support on the show is much appreciated, especially if you contribute financially to the show. All of those details are in the descriptor of the video. With that being said, let me say thank you very much. And I'll see you on Wednesday for the BDL show, and next week, Sunday, of course, for another episode of Liberty and Friends. And as I always say at the end of every show, a reminder to you to never trust a commie.